Good afternoon and welcome back. Welcome to session 3, Artistic Impression. Dedicated entirely to the fine arts, in the following duet, we are going to dive deeply into the very process of artistic creation and its accompanied questions. The first lecture investigates realities and relations of artistic making across both human and non-human actions in the context of computer-aided design and manufacturing, while the second lecture questions the moral role of the artist through liberated grids of imagination, complicated in a web of facts and fabrications. Our first speaker, joining us from Germany, is Frank Bauer, who studied social sciences history at JGU Mainz and architecture at UIC, IIT Chicago, and UDK Berlin. The same year, he co-founded Bureau Vogel Bauer, an agency that specialized in the planning and realization of contemporary sculpture. He is currently working as an Elsa-Neumann PhD fellow at UDK Berlin on the computational ontologies of contemporary art fabrication. By this, Bauer embodies a showcase of a multidisciplinary traveler. Let's join Frank on his journey.
Hello.
Hello, Frank. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I would first like to thank all the organizers for this fantastic endeavor and present myself. So you presented myself already. I'm Frank Bauer. I'm a researcher and practitioner between the fields of art and architecture production. And I would like to talk on the grids of computational art production, or the convergence of artist, instrument maker, and fabricator today. In fact, recent years have witnessed an ongoing engagement with the making of fine arts. We are seeing growing attention for how computational logics induce unprecedented collective forms of authorship, how creative work is conditioned by its material and operational basis, or how artistic practices are continuously entangled somewhere between the digital turn, industrial production, and traditional craftsmanship. While such research usually focuses on motives on process, performance, or production, traditional categories of art historical analysis, so the author or the exhibition, are put into perspective in favor of more complex, diffuse, and distributed contexts. Today, I would like to present, in addition to this discourse, and in the frame of this fantastic conference, discuss disciplinary and professional grids as both construed and constitutive epistemic categories, as an alternative authorial category to the matter. I will analyze the Resonator series by German artist Nevin Anadak as an example which converges what you see here, the making of artistic intent, digital modeling as making, instrument making, and performance or performative making. The making of artistic intent. The making of an artwork, at least since its Renaissance inception as disegno, has long been a somewhat ephemeral process of high mysteriousness and little accessibility. In Latin, designare means to scheme or to find, and as such, designing was often displaced to an individual moment of epiphany, of creativity, so to say. More recently, discourses across art and design theory have contested such fixations, and I would like to follow media theorists Bernhard Siegert and Lorenz Engel in their argument how creation should be in fact emancipated from its anthropocentric bias, and, I quote, instead of conceiving of designing as a fundamental act of artistic creation, of withdrawing it from its history as some sort of anthropological concept, it may be inquired as the historical results of discursive, technical, and institutional practices. This demands to revise the image of art as an immaculate act of creativity. And at the same time, and at the given example of Resonator Winds by Nevin Anadak, this means to complement the ubiquity of brilliant imagery of pristine pieces in galleries and instruments and museums by its opposite, so to say. It means to replace the notion of the artist as some genius black box with what art historian Barbara Whitman recently framed as, and I quote again, the exteriorities of designing. That means the conditions, the media, and tools at effect. Such play with personalities, conditions, and elements from varying cultures are a frequent theme within Anodak's oeuvre. Something we know already from her music room series. You see here a piece where she cooperated with traditional Greek instrument makers to adapt found furniture. Or her recent computation Raised the Roof to the 57th Venice Biennale in 2017, where she asked skeletal dancers to split the piece that she would offer into something between a performance, what you see here, and its lasting sculptural representation in copper that you see here. Artistic making does not stop at the gates of museums or ateliers here. For Nevin Aladak, the making of artistic intent is much more dislocated, is relocated towards the process of exhibiting and the interaction with visitors, performers, and staff. Aladak's pieces form a prime example for how instrument-based sound art takes up a special role in that respect. As it, and I would again like to quote now art historian Helga de la Motte Haber, how her pieces stress the spatial character as they expand sculpture into time. Second, digital modeling as making. To talk about digital modeling within fine arts combines two things at once. First, talking about how the digital affects the artwork, but secondly also how artistic production as an external and peripheral perspective on contemporary CAD/CAM practices, that is computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing practices, can be productive to renovate our architectural discourse, so the discourse that we as architects usually have on these matters, and which is usually focused on questions of optimization and efficiency. Within the working process of the Resonator series, digital tools and workflows were used without real precedent. Firstly, because computational tools and traditional instrument making have hardly any contact at all. And secondly, other than for architectural rendering, for instance, that you see here, true conventions on how to depict virtual sketches of artworks hardly do exist. That is because the artwork is the artwork and not its rendering, right? So there is artwork as rendering, but usually no renderings of artworks that then would be produced. The present inquiry consciously draws on this seeming lack of experience. It suggests that there lies potential, that an abandonment of existing disciplinary customs in favor of problem-specific and individual solutions may instigate complex and potentially more innovational design solutions. It follows an approach by design educators Hannah Groninger and Thomas Schwitz, the separation of what they call devices for making. In German, the term would be Werkzeug, from devices for thinking. In German, the tool would be Denkzeug. It suggests that it is especially this lack of precedence, the application towards unplanned, unexpected purposes, eventually deconstructing given programming throughout such transgressions, when the former are rendered innovational in their transforming to the latter. Such reprogramming of CAD/CAM, again, has a strong record of its own. From the emergence of surface-based modeling within the post-war aeronautical industries to the development of early computer-aided curve-based drawing environments. And this is making such transgressions today only more likely. To make it short, there is no convention on how to render an artwork. Before this background, it appears reasonable that the reprogramming of highly bespoke and specific devices and processes of renderings across Aladak's pieces may lead to especially inspirational outcome, as they are employed partly according, but partly different and partly even contrary to common employments within their original realms. Along the computational planning process, sketches or initial drafts for each sculpture are subject to further assisted planning in virtual environments. Through a phase of three-dimensional experimentation in the widespread modeling software Rhinoceros 3D in this case, we as planners and the artist further developed and determined the instrumental volumes as rearrangements or collages with a new and uncommon aesthetic morphology, as instrumental individuals, so to say. In terms of ergonomics, this appears as an especially expedient strategy, as this particular software, Rhinoceros 3D, works on boundary representation basis, making it well suited to meet the artist's wish to work with elementary three-dimensional forms, such as cylinders, spheres, pyramids, cones, cubes, etc. To speak with art historian Anne-Sophie Lehmann, the artist uses the affordances by such softwares, referring to the affordance theory by American psychologist James J. Gibson. Affordances here are considered as offerings made by materials, tools, or in this case, softwares, as suggestions on how to employ and direct them towards solutions or results. I would say the intrinsic ontologies of software and those of the artwork go hand in hand, as it were. Towards the following fabrication process of the resonator series, design models have to be translated into manufacturing models. You see here another piece. The artistic vision, its instrumental body, and acoustic potentials as future instrument needs to be weighed up against each other. This means one has to speak the language of the addressees, which can mean shop drawings just as much as manufacturing data or assistance data for instrument makers. One may argue how digital making implies the category of fabrication knowledge here, perceived as cultivation of material and fabrication-based agencies. To do so means nothing less but to renew an attention for those mediations from idea to material, which have actually always sidelined the history of architecture and of building at large. How Robin Evans would have framed it, the translations from drawing to building, the making of projections from the virtual to the physical, as it were. Third, instrument making. In her recent volume, Outmoded Techniques, art historians Magdalena Bussard and Henrike Haug delineate a growing technical turn of contemporary artistic production. Instrument making is a prime example for this. Today, and still today, there rarely appears any craft exercise at such continuity with historical roots than those of the instrument maker, because we still see strong traditions of musical performance, the strong stance of classical music, its instrumentation and performance sets, and so on. In the manufacturing of a classical wind instrument, distinct materialities and historically evolved forms result in a form-merging acoustic quality, common appearance, and handling, relying on tradition largely. Analog pieces, however, hardly do fit in these conventional categories of the instruments. As they are custom assemblages of musical instrument families, they require just as custom means and forms of production. Therefore, various alternatives of construction and detailing, either inspired by or consciously breaking with this traditional archetype, need to be found, discussed, and adapted to arrive at one final instrumental piece. The Berlin-based fabricator of the structure, as well as the participating instrument makers, largely contributed along this process, both in forming the planning and execution, as well as the experimenting with and mounting of instrument parts. To the same extent that all contributors could not rely on traditional joinery, they had to find custom solutions for connectors and detailing, notably. One example for such inventiveness, for instance, would be the fixing of mouthpieces, which usually requires very specific conditions and materialities to function in a traditional sense, and had to be redeveloped by all participant parties. Interestingly, Anodek itself describes this cooperation as a very traditional form of working in sculpture. The production of an initial physical mock-up in the workshop is followed by subsequent stages of refinement, involving the order of specimens, the building of prototypes, of mouthpiece fittings, and so on. Acquired experience and information will then feed back into the digital models, eventually informing machines and craftsmen alike. An iterative process between these grids of making, if you will, making dialogue between them and the execution increasingly important. Fourth, performative making. Sound art is performance, the interaction of performer, piece, and audience at a given time and place. To understand resonator, wind, as an exceptionally apt example to follow such performative qualities, is suggested by Rachel Jans, the curator to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art exhibition of the piece, and I quote, "The artworks are responsive entities, not passive objects, and when plucked, stroked, strummed, or puffed into, they answer with vibrations. They possess an enchanting power to instigate interaction, drawing performance to explore and experience their noises." Already in its elemental form, citing something between a balloon and a pufferfish, how the artist frames it, Resonator Wind repeats such motives of activity and action, inviting visitors and performers to take part to further inflate the piece, so to say, attempting to actively engage in an exhibition as an ongoing process of artistic creation. Within and throughout this exhibition, Alladag's works develop themselves in various formats such as performances, workshops, and sound sessions. If one listens to self-descriptions of the artist, Alladag would always stress that her musical sculptures first and foremost were to be activated. They become actors and tell their stories. By doing so, her pieces are multiplied, mirrored, and repeated by a wide set of involved artists, dancers, musicians, and performers. To the same degree that these individuals, the instruments, do differ from traditional instruments, however, the performative outcome is not anything but certain. Resonator Wind, for instance, does offer mouthpieces from varying wind instruments, yet no common options for holding the instruments, or handling or manipulating it. We have again Werkzeug and Denkzeug, if you remind yourself of here. We need to improvise. We cannot rely on practice and tradition. The physical instruments clearly do have a stake in this creation, which also approaches to the relation of artifact, exhibition space, and artists on a much more general level. The interesting question then is whether the sound experiment works, and I would like to share this short recording of one instrument of the series at its UX expedition. So let me conclude here. This lecture suggests the grid as an alternative authorial category, and it does so against common positivist claims on the so-called digital revolution of arts and architecture, and the understanding of technologically multiplied individual authorship. Alladag's Resonator series clearly marks how such processes do not necessarily delimit artistic agency and creativity, but rather demand artists to develop and implement altered and maybe augmented working logics. Grids do make a difference here as they channel, alter, and amend contemporary realities of making. It has also become obvious, however, how these grids have to remain porous, allowing and requiring the transfer of knowledge and techniques. This leaves us with one question: how far may existing and future agencies turn out to amend or compete with each other? The planning of production of the Resonator series was able to disclose some insights here, and with an outspoken interest for inherent links of software environments, craft traditions, and production logics, this reveals how both human, like drawing, interpreting, executing, and non-human, like storing, converting, interpolating, translations, constitute art, from intent over practices to artifacts. There is reason to argue that novel perspectives towards creativity in the digital age need, more than anything, what has been framed by cultural historian Wolfgang Schäffler, and I need to quote again here. Therefore, we need an interdisciplinary experimental laboratory which allows for an inter- and upfolding of distinct knowledge cultures in design processes. So we need interdisciplinarity, and this conference is a prime example for this. And as part of the recently introduced Berlin-based Cluster of Excellence Methods of Activity, Image-Space Material, my research takes a part in that. It draws heavily on such an understanding and its related notions of agency. The given talk may be considered as one attempt to put this thought into practice. It substantiates by cross-fertilizing disciplinary frameworks usually held disparate, and moreover, by rendering the evolving constraints and logics, the affordances, productive, instead of framing out and smoothing them. I try to give some first insights into how far computational art production may address this ontological divide along the conscious convergence of artistic, planning, instrumental, and performative realities of making. Where this journey leads, however, remains open for now. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'm welcome to answer them. Thank you.
Excuse me, Rachel, but you're muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Your new look at these instruments is no doubt food for thought. One of our guests asked, what about personalization of these instruments according to different segments of users? For example, challenged populations or the elderly?
That's a very interesting question indeed. Do you hear me? Yeah, do you hear me?
Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah, no, thank you. I understood it. But you hear me, right? Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, yeah, I was on mute.
No, it's a very interesting question because this is something that we continuously work on with the artist. So we recently could assist her in the design and manufacturing of a art in public installation in Zurich that was in fact installed at like an elderly home, one could say. So it's a large scale urban development where old people wishing to reside within the city boundaries and not at its periphery have been assigned places. And in the renovation of this complex, the artist proposed in a contest a set of instruments that is actually drawing on all these kind of open spaces at the entrance, at the elevators, in the hallways, and kind of proposed instruments that would then be activated by the residents themselves or their visitors. So it's very close to people, her approach, one could say. And she definitely tries to kind of design and facilitate custom experience that is then, for instance, just great when you are an old person living in one of these complexes and your nephew or grandchildren come and visit you, and you can play with them on the violin that is just out there. But it's not a violin, of course. It's something between a violin and an artwork. Yeah, but like bespoke or custom experience are very important here.
I can see from your example that it engages all kinds of ages, basically.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, which is
that's very important. Yeah.
Okay, so Frank, thank you very, very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
We look forward to welcoming you in Israel in person. Okay, so thank you and good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you too.